Hello, everyone. Welcome to another empowering episode of Empower Her Voices. Today, we are beyond thrilled to bring you an episode that promises wisdom, innovation, and inspiration as we dive into the extraordinary journey of Nigel Gardner, a scientist and educational visionary and a trailblazer in international education. Nigel's career is nothing short of legendary. With over 2 decades of groundbreaking contributions to education, he has actually shaped global learning landscapes through curriculum innovation, technology integration, and transformative leadership. His journey from the realms of environmental science and biology to becoming a pioneer in international education is masterclass in vision, leadership, and impact. And as the founder and director of Four Corners Education, he's reshaping the future of learning by empowering international schools with cutting edge technology and student agency, digital transformation, and progressive curriculum design. And with expertise spanning IB, UK national curriculum, IGCSE or GCSE, A levels, and vocational education, he has actually transformed education systems across multiple continents. And his leadership has actually left an indelible mark at institutions such as UCSI International School, where he served as whole school principal, SN now as chief academic officer, and GPS Brooks Kochi, where he was the founding principal, spearheading digital transformation and curriculum innovation. But beyond his academic and institutional impact, Nigel is a fierce advocate for the future of education, which is like driving initiatives that empower women and young professionals in leadership. His approach isn't just about academic excellence, it's about fostering inclusive, diverse, and future ready learning ecosystems. So, Nigel will take us through his personal evolution. He's going to share his bold vision for the future of schools and unveil powerful leadership lessons that can actually inspire educators, young professionals, and especially women striving to break barriers in leadership and education. So, buckle up for an electrifying conversation with one of the most influential figures in global education, the extraordinary Nigel Gardner. Nigel, welcome to Empower Her Voices series. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very, very much, Fazia. I've got to jump in and say that you've made me sound amazing, and I'm not. I'm just a tiny little blip in the landscape of education globally, nothing more than that. And that there are thousands and thousands of people throughout the world who are doing very similar sorts of things and driving towards it. And I would guess probably almost every educator in a classroom is in some little way trying to do exactly the same. So thank you for that introduction, but I'm definitely not that important.
I really appreciate your humble approach, but you have actually made an impact. So thank you. So, Nigel, you started in the world of science and ecology before stepping into education leadership. So, what sparked this transition, and how did your scientific mindset shape your approach to leading schools?
Well, oddly, I didn't start in science. I started in industry, which is a science.
Right.
To give you a very, very potted background of it, I completed British O levels in 1982. I've got 14 O levels, which were really easy because the British curriculum is about memorization and not much more. And I think the lowest grade that I've got is a B, of which I've only got one, so you can work out what the others are. And I applied to do some A levels, and the school that I was in didn't like the combination that I did, so I dropped out of school. It's as simple as that. Okay. I dropped out of school, and 3 weeks later, I started a forestry business at 17 years old, just about by then. Couldn't drive, so I paid by the time I got some work, I paid somebody to drive me for a couple of years until I could get a driving license. And really for about 14, 15 years, I run a forestry business that was involved in conservation forestry, which is the application of science. Yeah, I have professional qualifications in forestry and conservation, and when I got to about 28, round about that, I decided to get a degree, and I went and got a first class honours degree at Lancaster University in ecology. But at the same time, I was actually involved in vocational education, in training people in the forestry industry, in the conservation industry. And through a number of steps and hoops, that moved into further education colleges in South Wales, where I'm originally from, and very, very quickly into the International Baccalaureate at CTC Kingshurst in Birmingham, which was the first state sector IB diploma school in the UK.
Okay.
And a very, very different school to most other
Right.
UK schools. It was predominantly a vocational school with the International Baccalaureate as well, in a city, in deprived inner city Birmingham.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So, Nigel, education is evolving rapidly, as you know that, but many schools still follow outdated models. So, if you have the power to completely redesign the education system from scratch globally, what would that look like?
That's very hard, and I keep thinking about this as obviously ourselves, we met on LinkedIn, and there are lots of the one thing, and like I said, your introduction was wonderful and fabulous. The one thing I'm definitely not is a guru. Yeah, I don't know anything at all. I've been very, very lucky to work with a lot of people who have brains that are much bigger than mine, and all I've ever really done is steal ideas off people. Yeah, and in reality, that's all we do. Yeah, and I think the problem with education has become, and I'm going to say this quite openly, I'm a socialist. I grew up in the
Sure.
South Wales mining valley, and education was basically destroyed by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And they
Okay.
created what was this idea of meritocracy, the neoliberal idea, and it's let down lots of people. Yeah. And part of the reason I'm an IB educator is that the IB has this philosophical background. The IB is not about grades. Yeah, it's some of the highest achieving schools in the world, but at its core, it's about actually making the world more peaceful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the problem, is that we've tied education to only this idea of merit and only this idea of meritocracy. And it has to be for something more than that. But even within the merit, we've tied it to a merit that for thousands of students, definitely in the West, has become meaningless. Yeah. Vocational education in big parts of the world has disappeared. We're left with this idea that the only way is routes through to university. And that's sort of a long way round to say that what we need to do is not change education. What we need to do is have multiple educations. We need to have multiple ways for students to access education and multiple ways for students to engage with education. A driving license, it's an education.
It's an
You
education.
don't sit in a classroom and only use a book to do a driving license. Yeah.
True.
If you learn to sail a boat, actually not so much now, GPS has changed it a little bit, but if you learn to sail a boat in the old days before GPS, you had to learn to do trigonometry, because you sail boats by trigonometry.
Yeah.
But the number of students that sit in maths classrooms and have no idea there's a use for what they're doing. Yeah. And I think also, sadly, and one of the, this is going to sound really terrible, but one of the saddest experiences I actually had while I was in India was the number of boys that would come in to actually find out about the courses we offered in the International Baccalaureate, and they wanted to be accountants. And if any job is going to disappear with artificial intelligence, it's accountancy, because it's just moving numbers in a column. Yeah. So we've got to be very creative about, we can't plan for education at the moment. We don't know what the world is going to need exactly.
Okay.
So what we can do is actually fall back on the good things about education as education, not education as getting a certificate. But why do we educate? Well, the number one reason for most people in the world is to be able to work at the end of it.
True.
So if we're not educating for work, we're not educating most people in the world. Yeah.
Yes.
A very, very small number of people go on and become academics, but we tend to educate for academia, not for reality. And so I think we've got to bridge that gap somewhere. Now, there's multiple ways that we could do this. I don't have a revolutionary formula for what we do to education. I think what we've got to do is educations, if that makes sense. We need multiple ways. So the International Baccalaureate is just one way. Yeah, which is why which is why the IB introduced the career-related certificate. There are at post-16, there are now 2 routes in the International Baccalaureate. One linked to vocational work and one linked sort of to academia. Yeah, and so we need much more of that sort of that mix. Yeah, again, one of the really, really interesting things about being in India is that apprenticeships still exist.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that students can leave school with, I'm going to get the word, please forgive me, I'm going to get the wording wrong on this, but students can leave school at grade 10 with a CBSE result and go on to a vocational college and develop a trade. That's disappeared in large sections of the world as well. So we need those mixes. We need ways that students can actually get fulfillment wherever they intend to be. I never intended to be an educator. Yeah, I didn't even intend to be in ecology. I intended to be a lumberjack. Yeah, that was that's what I wanted to do. Actually, that's a lie. What I wanted to do was score the winning try for Wales against England at some time in rugby, but I wasn't good enough. So I took the backup plan of forestry. And so we've got to have those multiple ways of getting in. So I've got nothing really revolutionary. It's just about making sure that it's a word I've started using. Actually, I'm going to change tack a little bit. And if I'm talking too much, just tell me to shut up a second, right?
No, please. So,
we talk about the importance of education.
Yeah.
But we rarely talk about the relevance of education.
Oh,
and
yes.
It might be important to educators, but it might not be relevant to the student or the family.
True.
Or society. So we've got to start thinking about what is relevant education. And if relevant education is turning out more people to work as motor vehicle mechanics, that's great. If in another part of the world it's turning out people who can operate supply chains, in warehousing and stuff like that, that's great. And if in another part of it is turning out economists and entrepreneurs, that's great. But we've got to see where the relevance is. And not for every student is it relevant.
Oh, that's really incredible. So, Nigel, I was just wondering when you just said that, about vocational training, you have like put stress on the vocational training. So is it, if I'm not wrong, so is it that skill-based education in which the student, for example, if I'm a student and I'm like 16 years old and I want to become a carpenter, right? And I'll go to any vocational training center, I learn the skills and I'll just make my career. Even I can open up my own shop, I can be an entrepreneur. So is it something that apart from IB, STEM education is also advocating the same bit? Do you agree, or is there any different narrative?
Ken Robinson said this better, and I'm going to use Ken Robinson because I'm likely to get shouted at by a lot of teachers. Ken Robinson said the problem with education is it's full of teachers, or just about that. And one of the problems is with being a teacher is you were very, very good at education. Teachers were good at the game of education. They were good at learning. But if you walk into any staff room and ask teachers if they liked mathematics, out of 50 teachers, 3 will put their hands up, because mathematics. And I come from a statistical background. I like math. I love mathematics.
I agree with you.
So there's a reason why students don't like mathematics, and it's unfair on mathematics. It's not the teachers, it's actually the curriculum. Some of the time we don't have application in it. But if you think, and I'll go back to that idea of an accountant. Well, if a student's going to train to be an accountant, they're going to be continually using mathematics, but they might not be using mathematics that they've learnt in the classroom, or to use the old-fashioned version of an engineer. My father was an engineer. He never went to university. He was a tools and trades engineer, and so my father used a slide rule. He used lookup tables. He used logarithms all the time. He understood hydraulic pressures. It's all mathematics, and we've lost that connection. And again, that's that word relevance. And there's no reason why we can't have that connection. Yeah. Pythagoras' theorem actually has a reality. It exists because the Greeks built temples. That's the only reason Pythagoras' theorem exists. It wasn't written as a mathematical theorem. It was written as a geometry theorem to put temples up. Yeah. And when quadratic equations, international size paper is a quadratic equation. Yeah. So we've lost the connection. That's not to say that everybody has to do vocational learning, but I think sometimes we've lost the connection between what we educate students in with a use for it.
That's very well said.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem for that is this idea that everybody should go to university. That's an Anglophone thing. The Germans don't think like that. The French don't think like that. The Dutch don't think like that. Their technical colleges are university level qualifications, but they're technical qualifications.
The technical, right.
They don't see any difference. And I think the problems with it's interesting. If you sit on a forum in Europe, and my French is terrible, but I can just about manage. You sit on an educational forum in Europe, and nobody's talking about how education is broken. They're saying it needs changing and needs to be brought up to date. It's only in an Anglophone viewpoint that we seem to have this idea that education is broken. It might just be that we've gone down the wrong route in Anglophone education, and in other places they've maybe gone down what's possibly a better route. Yeah. But it's got to look different in every place as well. Yeah, it's got to be flexible and look different.
Great, and very rightly said that it's not how education, the importance of education, it's about the relevance of education. You have actually narrated the way which is very relatable to all the educators. And being an educator or being a teacher, we should also reflect that the kind of education we are imparting, is it relevant or not? Very well said. So Nigel, coming from science background, do you see leadership as an art, like as something more of an art or science? So what's one leadership principle that most leaders, school leaders particularly, get it wrong? Because there are many misconceptions when it comes to both these things.
I'll be honest with you, I do not know. And partly for that, I mentioned rugby earlier. Everything I know about leadership comes from playing rugby.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I coached rugby as well at a decent level. So most of the things I've learned about leadership come from standing in a changing room with guys who are bigger than me. If I get it wrong, are as likely to punch me as they are to listen to me. Yeah. And in forestry, as you can imagine, in forestry, if somebody doesn't like what I say, they're going to throw a chainsaw at me. Yeah. So what I've learned about leadership more comes from that than any formal courses or anything like that. I've done leadership courses, obviously, and so, but I think at its root, leadership is about coaching. Leaders need to be coaches. Yes, there's a managerial aspect as well. There's an administrative aspect. But if you're going to lead, you need to lead as a coach. You need to lead in the same sort of way, as at the weekend. Yeah, actually, at this weekend, there's going to be 6 coaches running out on rugby fields across Europe, leading their national teams out. They're going to lead as coaches. Yeah. And so I think that, to me, that's the secret. It's about breaking down to what is the next step that you need to do. And again, there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Leadership, actually, some of the best leaders that there are in schools are the person that creates the most trouble in a staff room. I quite
Okay.
like educators who argue with me, who tell me that I'm wrong, because quite often they will lead inside their own sphere. And we've all come across
Yeah.
it in all industries. Yeah.
True.
The
True.
water cooler leader. Yeah. Um,
True.
so as a leader, I have to negotiate. I have ideas.
Mm.
And sometimes I've got to implement those ideas whether everybody agrees with me or not, because they're requirements. But leadership is really about negotiating. And sometimes I get it wrong. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think part of it is, and it's not nice admitting you get it wrong. Yeah. I've got a
Yeah.
little bit of an ego. I've got a little bit of an ego. Everybody's got some ego. Yeah. And to admit that you get it wrong is quite hard, but you've also got to admit you get it wrong as well. And there's nothing wrong in getting it wrong. We keep telling students that it's okay to get it wrong as long as you try again. And
Yes.
I don't have the reference for this at hand, but there was a study done of leadership in
Okay.
UK schools about 20 years ago, maybe a bit less than that. And
Right.
they discovered the turnover in leadership in UK schools is about 2 years for some leaders. Yeah.
Okay.
Oddly, the leaders that get turned over the quickest are the ones that make the biggest impact, because usually they get turned over because they don't make instantaneous results. And the leaders that have the least impact are the ones that make instantaneous results. Yeah. Schools are organizations, they're families, they grow. So things take time. They take time to embed, they take time. Yes. So we talk about changing education now, but it's not going to happen for the next 10 to 15, 20 years. We've got to, as leaders, we've got to plan long term, but the job tends to be short term. Yeah. David Hawley, who's a friend of mine, who was Deputy Director General of the International Baccalaureate and then was head of the International School of Geneva. David, as part of his PhD, or as his PhD, researched headship in the international schools. The average headship in international schools is 2 years.
Just 2 years.
Just 2 years. Now, there are heads that have stayed in post for much longer than that. So that
Yes,
must mean there are
exactly.
heads who only stay in post for months. Yeah. And that's because international schools tend to be run by boards, or they tend to be run as businesses. And quite often international schools are looking for instantaneous results and instantaneous change, but change takes time.
Yeah, change takes time. Yes.
Change takes time. And I think good leadership recognizes that what you do today may not have an effect for 5 or 6 years. But if you can plant the seeds of something that, even if you're not there, maybe people think in the future you've achieved something.
You have achieved something. Yeah.
I think you have to try to be as humble as possible. Which can be hard, but you need to be humble. And the most important thing is try to listen. And when you're not listening, you're getting it wrong. Yeah. Because even if you've got the best ideas and have the best answers in the world, unless you're bringing everybody on board, you're not going to win anything. And again, somebody else we've got a lot of respect for in terms of this, Michael Fullan. Michael, on some research in leadership, suggested that leadership only works if you bring along the person who doesn't want to be led. And until you bring along that person who doesn't want to be led, you're not leading. All you're doing is managing. And there's a big difference between leading and managing. Yeah. And also accepting, and I'm going to say something that's a little bit difficult as well, because it doesn't occur in all instances. Leadership is not about telling other people what to do. Quite often, you should be employing people who know what to do.
Yeah.
and having some trust in your faculty, your workforce, to actually to be able to do the job you've employed them for. And there's a problem in that quite often in fee paying education,
Hmm.
is that employment is a bottom sum cost. It's employ as cheap as we possibly can because of profit in schools and things like that. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's investment in faculty. And I'll I'll touch on this slightly, but I'll come back to it.
Sure.
There are actually quite a lot of heads of school in the International Baccalaureate that are female.
Yeah.
They have to fight to get there because the doors are not as easily open.
Okay.
So part of leadership is making sure that doors are open for people. Yeah. And I genuinely mean this, and I've said this in every place, whether I've been principal, IB diploma coordinator, or whatever. If somebody leaves because I can't give them a career position that improves their career,
Hmm.
then I've actually done something very, very well. Because schools are small little organizations, there are not always going to be opportunities for people to take on a responsibility role. And if they leave
True.
because you've put them in a position to get a responsibility role,
Hmm.
well, they
Yeah.
something. You can encourage somebody to get a responsibility role that maybe sat back and didn't think and that doesn't have to be female. Yeah, that could be either
Hmm.
sex. Yeah. And
Hmm.
in
True.
some international could be cultural as well. Yeah, I've worked with lots of teachers from the Indian subcontinent and lots of teachers from Southeast Asia who don't see it that it's possible for them to have a leadership role.
Okay.
But I also know lots of educators around the world who are Indian, Pakistani, um, Singaporean, Malaysian, Indonesian,
Hmm.
Korean, not in their home countries, who've actually taken up leadership
Hmm.
positions around the world. So it is possible. But I think sometimes culturally, especially if you're female, there's a double whammy. There's the whammy of
Hmm.
one, good enough because I'm female, and I'm not good enough because I come from the wrong culture. And I think part of the reason to lead is to give other people a chance to lead as well.
Hmm. Part of the leadership is the chance to lead. And the most powerful bit that is, I'm sure it is influential, as you said, that leadership is all about coaching rather than just leading. It's more about coaching and it's like the mentorship as well, right? Am I using the right word? Like coaching and mentorship both. Right,
To
right.
me, that's to
So,
me
Nigel,
that
yeah,
to me that's the difference. I mean, to turn the term coaching round, a good coach deals with every player individually,
yeah,
and that's really what coaching is. Coaching is an individual thing. It's not, you coach a team, but you coach each individual separately because each individual has a separate position. I
yes,
can't I can't coach a forward the same as I'd coach a full back. You have to coach them differently. And it's the same with
yes.
teachers. Yeah, teachers at different stages in their career, teachers with different aspirations, teachers from different cultures. You have to be
Mm.
flexible to understand, which is where listening is so important.
True, true. And I still remember that, as you have mentioned about the personalized bit, which is important in coaching. So we used to make individual educational plans, the IEPs for the students when they used to join us, just to make sure that we are catering every single student on his or her individual level because we can't compare. There's no comparison between. It's just like you are comparing apple with oranges, which we cannot. So I totally agree with you. And leadership, no doubt one thing that you've said, I can actually relate to it, and I'm sure the teachers and educators can relate. You said that leadership is also about ensuring that the doors are open, and the people who can actually make an impact can stay there. And this is something which most of the educators, in fact, if I talk about my country, Pakistan, yes, we really need to go with this bit. We prefer to have coaching for the students, but for the teachers, when it comes to teacher training, there's this batch of 100 teachers sitting in a hall and we're just giving them training and we said, oh wow, it's a very good professional development. No, but you have given a very good point that, teachers also need individual coaching. This is like very important because if they turn out to be a leader, then they are not going to lead with change. They'll just, be on a traditional or typical path. That's
Yeah,
very well
and
said. So,
totally agree
yeah,
with you.
please.
Over the years, I've worked with some teachers from Beacon House, and there's some fabulous teachers in there. Yeah, and
Yeah,
quite
true.
often I've worked with them inside environmental systems, and I've met teachers where when I've seen them, I like, you really should be a coordinator or a, yeah, and yeah, there's a cultural part in it as well, and I accept
Yeah,
that. So part of that is breaking down those cultural barriers that say yes, you can be, yeah,
true, true,
yes, you should
true.
be, yeah, yeah.
Yes. We need to
Mm.
show that confidence. And I agree with the teachers at Beacon House because I've worked with the group and there's some amazing people out there and truly investing on professional development
Mm.
as well. So talking about schools, so there's this bit AI. So I generally say that, rather than just saying AI as a buzzword, let's go, dive deep into it. So with this AI digital transformation and evolving student needs, because student needs are evolving the way it's going, where do you see the biggest shifts happening in education in the next 10 years? Are schools prepared for what's coming on the way? If we talk about the AI transformation happening right now.
No, as
Hmm.
simple as that. And they weren't prepared in 1995, and they've never been any better prepared. In 1995,
Hmm.
Microsoft launched Encarta alongside Windows 95 and promised educators that Encarta would change the world for them. And it didn't.
Hmm. It didn't.
And Google Suite told educators it would change
Yeah,
the world for them. And it didn't.
it didn't.
And,
True.
and everything we've ever done with
Yeah.
technology has not changed education. So why should artificial intelligence change it? Yeah. And there's a
Hmm.
reason, there are reasons for that. The biggest one is that throughout most of the world, initial teacher training is atrocious.
Hmm.
Most teachers go to teacher training of some sort and learn how to deliver a curriculum.
Yeah, delivery.
There's only places like Finland where they learn pedagogy.
Hmm.
And in Finland, the teacher training is 7 years before you can teach in a classroom.
Wow, 7 years.
Before you can teach in a classroom. And you must do
Amazing.
research. Yeah. And it's very expensive.
Hmm.
And then you get into the situation where I love my time in Malaysia, but in Malaysia, all you need to have to teach is a degree. And you can walk into a
Okay.
classroom and
Hmm.
damage children because you know nothing about teaching. All you know about is
Yes.
delivering. And I think, and if you
Hmm.
project that on, that's going to be the problem with artificial intelligence. You're going to have some
Right.
people that are going to rush ahead and use it without any checks and balances.
Okay.
And I have worries about artificial intelligence for multiple. My eldest is in the University of Maastricht at the moment doing a degree in artificial intelligence and data engineering.
Oh,
And
okay.
my eldest turns around every day, and it was an IB student who did 4 higher levels in the IB diploma, turns around every week and goes, it's of no use in a school.
Oh,
Now that's
okay.
somebody who's building models. Because if you think about what, again, using that term guru, what most of the gurus are suggesting is that we're going to
Hmm.
personalize education.
Yeah.
No, what we're going to do is isolate education. We're going to isolate students so they're sat on their own with a screen,
Hmm.
and we're going to monetize it.
Hmm.
And that social interaction is going to be, the loss of social interaction is going to be worse than it was during COVID.
Yeah. It has already decreased. Yes.
Yeah. And what we, and education is it's a communal aspiration.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I teach theory of knowledge as well, and a picture that I use in theory of knowledge, which I use to get the students to think about it. It's a painting of one of the first classes at the University of Bologna in Italy in 13 something. Yeah, it's a long time ago anyway. Yeah,
Right.
and it's a mathematics lecture. And everybody sat in the audience are wearing relatively sort of brimmed hats with a sort of flat hat. But the lecturer is wearing a turban because the lecturer was Muslim in a Catholic country in the Middle Ages, because Europe had lost the ability to do mathematics, and Europe needed let me just check what's happened. I've lost. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Let me just see. Is it at your end or something?
It's my camera, I think.
Yeah. You can take your time, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yes.
When I say camera, what I really mean is my old phone.
Okay.
There we go.
I'm also using my phone. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah, I've got a feeling my phone decided to go to sleep. So we've learned over the years, throughout history, we've learned by discourse.
Okay.
You can't learn sat behind a computer screen in isolation. You can pick up facts, but learning is about interaction. Yeah, and again, I'm gonna quote some research that might not entirely be true in the way that I'm going to quote it, but John Hattie, who is quite famous for, it's gone again.
No problem. You can fix it. No issues.
I know what it is. Take me 2 seconds.
Okay.
My dog is asleep.
Take your time.
My dog is asleep behind the table.
Okay.
And my dog has just pulled the cable.
Oh.
There we go. So I've just moved the cable. Sorry.
No issues.
Yes, I've got 2 dogs asleep in the room with me at the moment.
Oh,
there we go. Right. So, so John Hattie, and it may not be John Hattie's research directly, but I think it was in the University of Waikato. They looked at learning inside the Maori peoples and the Polynesian people. And Polynesians are the most intelligent people on earth. They can solve any problem as long as they're allowed to work in a group. If they work individually, they don't know how to access, because culturally it's a group culture.
Okay. That's
and good. If you think about humanity, everything we learn in humanity, we don't learn everything from one person. We learn from our interactions with people. We learn from trial and error. And I think that's the problem. That's right. I do apologize.
No problem. No problem. It happens. No worries.
So I think that's one of the issues I have with artificial intelligence at the moment. Everything that's being suggested about individualizing learning, and I don't like this idea of individualization in the way it's being presented. Individualization is what we were talking about before, making sure that the diet every student, but that can happen inside a big organization. It doesn't happen after. And the other worry about it is that with all the best will in the world, at the moment, it can only do process and regurgitative knowledge. It can't do nuance. It might do in the future, but it can't do nuance. So at school, you were probably taught the equation for photosynthesis.
Yes, true.
There's no such thing. Your teachers lied to you.
Like, seriously?
And there isn't an equation for respiration. What that is a model of the overall process.
So it comes in a short, because this is, I would like to know more.
So once students get to post-16, they learn about the Krebs cycle and the Calvin cycle, and they're all stepwise individual little reactions,
Yeah.
But if you use a large language model to mark in a specific way and you look for a specific answer, the student that comes along and goes, there isn't an equation. It's a series of processes. The large language model actually will not mark it correctly.
Oh.
So once you get into higher order thinking skills, and once you get into real critical answers, once you start evaluation, analysis, synthesis, those become highly subjective. And I sometimes use this with new students coming into schools, especially if they come from a background where they understand British education. And I try and explain the difference between the International Baccalaureate and, say, British A-levels is that generally in an A-level, you will be asked to explain the causes of climate change.
True.
In the International Baccalaureate, you'll be asked to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so when we get to problem solving, then it becomes even weaker. And I don't know what the remedies are. I think there's a lot of use for it. I did an MA a year and a half ago. I actually used artificial intelligence in the MA myself to actually do some data analysis. But in terms of it revolutionizing education, as AI as education, I'm not sure. As developing some really great tools that students can harness, that's different. Yeah. So I think we need to think, and then we come back to the problem that most teachers are not trained to be computer programmers.
Yes.
And they're not trained the pedagogy. And again, I attended a conference a number of years ago where industry trainers who used rapid development techniques to put curricula together to train. They were actually training inside the Air Force, and a group of teachers who were examiners in the International Baccalaureate and workshop leaders. We talk two different languages. We don't even talk about the same we both educate, but it's so different. Yeah.
So different.
So until school educators learn something about that pedagogy, and until the pedagogy that's going to write the stuff for schools learn something about school pedagogy, it's likely to be this disconnect. And at the end of the day, companies will make a lot of money out of it, but students may not learn anything.
True.
Yeah.
It's very, very unfortunate, but a sad reality. Yes, I totally agree with you. So, this AI bit.
That's not to say there isn't a place for it, but I think we've got to really think about how we use it. And I don't think it's a panacea for all of the problems of learning.
True, true. As you have said that we need to look at the tools which students can really harness, like, for this, rather than going for this silo culture, there should be more towards this collaborative culture. As you have mentioned about Finland, I guess Polish people, you said that if they are being asked to sit in a group, they'll perform more better as compared to if they're sitting alone. So this is something, yes, we should get inspirations, and we should pick good things from different cultures or different countries where it's excelling. I totally agree with you. So, Nigel, can you share more about the vision behind Four Corners Education and Four Corners Educational System? How do you just solution supports international schools and promote student agency? Like, as you have already mentioned, I can see that you're a very strong advocate of IB, in which it's more about the actual concept based and critical thinking. So we would just like to know more about this bit.
It comes from that, and Four Corners Education and Four Corners Educational Systems are not just me; it's also my wife. And my wife is a lead. My wife is a lead practitioner in the IB for social emotional learning.
Okay.
And I don't work with a lot of schools. Yeah, I'm trying to be retired, to be honest. If I'm honest with you, yeah, I'm trying. This sounds terrible. I'm 59, but I've got some other projects that I'm interested in doing at the moment. So I'm doing some work with some schools, and some of it is on those ideas of school leadership, especially new schools in the International Baccalaureate. I've been very, very lucky. I've led 3 separate schools through 3 IB authorizations. Wow. And so I work with schools within the authorization process to hopefully try and understand more deeply that the IB is a philosophical background. we work with schools, or my wife works with schools in developing social emotional systems, support systems for student success.
Okay.
Yeah, in the school that because my wife is still in the school that my wife is in, she is in charge of student success. Now, student success includes the things that, I hate this term, but it's generally understood. Yeah, special educational needs.
Okay.
But student success also includes student success also includes the students that we used to call gifted, and I hate both those terms because they don't really exist. But it includes all of those access things. Yeah, students with access arrangements for ADHD and stuff like that. So my wife works with schools in putting policies in place for things like that, and child protection as well, which obviously is finally the international sector is waking up to that. But the other thing that I've worked with a few schools over the last 3 years with is actually what sadly is called programming. I run a couple of programs for primary schools where we program without computers.
And program without computers.
I wish schools would stop teaching programming. Partly because I've programmed since 1986, 87. Yeah, wow. I can write a couple of a few high-level languages. Programming is not learning to drag bits of code across. Programming is logic. And again, it comes back to critical thinking. So the work I do in schools, and I may be doing myself out of a job here with some schools, is we do treasure maps. That's all programming is. Programming is a treasure map. It's Robinson Crusoe. And you start off with walk forward 6 steps, stop, and you eventually turn that into distances and then bearings, and depending on the grade level, you increase the complexity of it. And by the time students get to secondary school, they're actually writing in quite nuanced language without having learned any programming, because it's just sets of instructions. It's just sets of logic instructions. So I do quite a bit. I do enough work with schools to, and so those. But I also work not so much with schools. I work with the IB as well in terms of curriculum development, and I work with other like-minded people who are trying to alter bits and pieces of education as well. And quite a lot of that is actually quite a lot of that we just do because we just want to change education a little bit. Yeah. Interestingly, not a single person who goes to university will tell you education's broken. Because education works for the person that went. Yeah, for the person who's trying to get to university, education worked. It's only teachers that tell you it's broken. Yeah. Or policymakers that tell you. And teachers tell you for one reason, and policymakers tell you for a different reason. Yeah. Which again comes back to this relevance thing. Education is differently relevant to an educator than it is to a student in a classroom. And it's different. Yeah. And so I try and work. So I do quite a bit of work around that at the moment, and bits and pieces. And yes, and so I'm doing a little bit of research on how on relevance in schools as well.
Relevance in schools. It's actually the need of the hour as well. If you talk about like Asia, this subcontinent, so relevance of education is something missing or being misunderstood. And you have actually debunked a couple of myths today. Even for my own self, there were few things in my mind in different perception and narratives. But once you have shared the correlation between the importance of education and the relevance of education, and then when it comes to training, teacher training, you have said that it's mostly about the delivery rather than guiding them about the pedagogy, like the way you have said Finland is doing. So this is something very useful. And even if, the educationists out there are going to watch this episode or watching this one, if you will actually try to analyze at your end that either the education you are imparting, is it just the delivery out there for the teachers or the students, or is it really creating some impact? So, Nigel, thank you so much. So, before that, we are going to wrap up. What advice do you have for young women and girls out there who actually aspire to take a leadership role into the education sector?
persist.
Okay.
Sadly, it does take persistence. And there will be hurdles, but the hurdles are not you. The hurdles are usually, I'm going to couch this very carefully in the way that I say it. The hurdles are usually in the
Sure,
minds of
sure.
the hurdles are usually in the minds of old men, or they
Mm.
also in the minds of women who've been persuaded that the old men are right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, and again, I'm going to draw in terms of this. I'm going to draw in Malaysia and Indonesia to the entire sort of
Sure.
Indian subcontinent, because there's a lot of similarities. Yeah. There are a lot of women working in education as teachers across Pakistan, India,
Mm.
Malaysia, and Indonesia.
Mm.
But there's very, very few women who get into leadership for multiple reasons. And I think
Mm.
one of the reasons is belief, because the belief sometimes is knocked out. Because if you've been passed over 4 or 5 times for a role you know you can do, and the only male teacher in the school has got the role every time, it's
Mm.
obviously can be opt-in. So there's two things you can do. One, you can leave that school and go somewhere else, which isn't always possible for everybody.
Mm. Mm. True.
Three things you can do. You can just accept it and sort of almost die internally, or you can fight.
Mm. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of the thing to do is and find people who will support you. There are like-minded people out there who will support
Mm.
and help, who've been through it themselves. I cannot talk of the perspective of a woman trying to go for a leadership position. I have no
Mm.
idea. But there are females out there who have done it and they've achieved it. And I think
Yeah.
the most important thing is persist and talk to the people who've done it and see how they did it and learn from them. And if you become a woman in a position to actually influence in the future,
Mm.
is to make sure that a female candidate is not going to be disadvantaged because they are female.
Mm. True.
Yeah.
True.
I saw something, I don't know where I saw it this morning, and I saw something this morning that was about university education. And it said one of the worst compliments you can give a female professor is that you look too young to be a professor. And I had to sit and think
Oh.
about it for a moment, because it's got
Mm.
lots of connotations and overtones in it. But it
Mm.
comes very,
Mm.
very much from a misogynist viewpoint that it's only old men who can become professors. Well, why
Mm.
shouldn't a woman become a professor?
True. True.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. Very well said. And well, it's the best advice that you've given, that persistence is something very important. And then connecting with like minded people who can actually, like the females who are already there in the leadership roles. And if someone wish to be there in the leadership role, they can reach out to them, or they can talk to them how they have like paved their ways for the leadership. Thank you so much, Nigel, for your time. I really appreciate. And today's episode was really thought provoking, especially when it comes to being a female and being into the education sector. This entire bit is really relevant. As you talked about the relevance of education, so all what you have said is relevant to an educator, because this is something that is coming from the grassroots level, and you have actually, there's this, we use this term dissection in
Yeah.
like biology or science. So you have dissected the concept that it's not just the surface bit on which we need to work. We need to go deep inside, and we need to see how much impact we are creating or we are not creating. We really need to
Yeah.
question ourselves before stepping into a classroom. And for a teacher, I really like the way you said that when the teacher is in the classroom, it's just the delivery of the lesson. And then what the
Mm.
students are going to learn out of it. They'll also be in
Yeah.
a monotone, and just like robots, a machine can do everything. an industry which is producing different products. So it's like a school producing different students going in the same lane. I totally agree with you. And we really appreciate that you took time out to support us for this thing, because these episodes are actually going to be an inspiration coming from your side and all the other leaders that we have invited, for the women who are actually somehow somewhere struggling, number one, or if they have any barriers over here in their mind. So when they get insights from people who have actually achieved a certain level, so they get inspired. Okay, so if they have done it, by doing so, we can also implement the bits which is relevant to us in our life. So thank you so much, and thank you
So
to the audience who are watching us today.
can I leave you with one thought and one admission? Yeah,
Yeah,
and this
yeah,
is a very,
please,
very,
please, please,
and
would love to.
this is a little bit of a secret, but I'm going to tell you guys in the world. Part of the reason I'm in leadership is
Okay.
that I've worked with much better educators than I am in the classroom. And 90% of those educators who are better
Oh,
educators than me are female.
wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that's like
So,
music to
so
our ears.
I
That's
took
great.
the coward's way out and went into leadership.
Okay, great.
But yes,
That's great, Nigel.
so generally I work with very, very good women educators who are quite often much better educators than their male colleagues, but don't always get the recognition of that.
This
Yeah.
is why we all need to actually play our part, which you have actually supported us, and this is like that. We also want to inspire those young women who have that inspiration within them, but they are clueless,
Yeah.
or they don't know how to navigate ways for themselves. So I'm sure that after listening to this and what you have said, they'll reach out to those women mentors and coach who are there in that sector and can lead the way for them. But as Nigel has said, that it's about persistence and then self-belief. The more
So
you will be persistent and the more belief you have in yourself, then there's no limit. You can even reach beyond the sky. So it's just like that.
yeah,
So thank you so much for tuning in
thank
today
you
for
very,
this
very much.
episode, and thank you so much, Nigel, for your time and for this insightful conversation. We really appreciate your time and we're really grateful. So see you again with another exciting episode of Empower Her Voices. Till then, keep smiling, keep shining, and believe in yourself and extend a hand for the people out there who needs your support.
Thank you
So
very,
see
very
you
much.
again.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.